Esther recoiled as Arthur jolted awake, her feet instinctively retreating 2 steps. But before she could pull away, he moved with surprising speed and seized her wrist with an iron grip. Pain radiated up her arm, and she worried that Arthur might snap the bone. His eyes locked onto hers, the raspiness in his voice reflecting the week that had passed since he entered his coma. "What did you just say to me? What happened to Dan?" Biting back the pain, Esther met his gaze head on. "The surgery failed, Arthur. Dan is dead." Disbelief washed over Arthur's features. "No, that can't be." Without a word, Esther extended the death notification she had folded up in her pocket. He released her, scanning the message briefly before ripping it in half and throwing the scraps on the floor. "How? I'll have the surgeon's head." Esther's voice held a frosty edge. "Funny, isn't it? Wasn't it you who set this all in motion? If you hadn't helped Stark kill Edward, you hadn't made Dan so desperate for your approval." Arthur's face quickly lost what color it had left. The weight of Esther's accusation hung heavy in the air, and she could tell she had gotten to him. Suddenly, a team of medical staff swarmed into the room, their faces marked by concern and curiosity. "Mr. Williams, please lay back down. We need to make sure that—" "Out!" Arthur's roar cut him off, leaving no room for argument. Another doctor tried to reason, "But there's a chance that—" "I told you to leave. Or do I need to make you?" Arthur's menacing tone cleared the room in seconds, but as soon as they were alone again, Esther watched him, his once formidable presence deflating as he slumped back against the bed. Finally, he looked up, his eyes glassy with tears. "He's really gone? My son is dead." She nodded simply, the truth undeniable. Arthur shook his head in disbelief, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're right, Esther. His blood's on my hands." Esther narrowed her eyes in shock, and Arthur continued, his voice cracking. "I'd always hoped he'd return home, team up with Oliver, and join the family. But he was so obsessed with acting. Couldn't wrap my head around it, and I wanted him on my side. So I made sure his career never took off. I never imagined he'd stick with it for so long. When he got that big role, I got desperate." Esther's cheeks turned red, and her eyes flashed with anger. She had her suspicions, but confronting the raw truth felt like a punch to the gut. "You did this? You knowingly crushed your own son's dreams?" "I only meant to have people stir up some trouble on set, get a little hurt, lose his leading role, and then come back into the fold. I never imagined." Arthur's voice wavered, breaking off. Esther's eyes widened in horror. "You're a monster." Arthur looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Fighting back tears, Esther's voice trembled. "You might as well have killed him yourself, Arthur. And what about Nancy's family? Your grudge with the old Young lineage wasn't even your own. And you choose to take it out on a generation that changed their name, had no knowledge of any of it. The same goes for the Davis family." She took a shaky breath, wiping away a tear. "What did any of them ever do to you? What did Dan do to deserve such a terrible father?" Arthur suddenly broke into a coughing fit that seemed to rattle his bones. The doctors watched with trepidation from the hallways, but Arthur's reputation for violence kept them from interfering. When he finally steadied himself, he looked squarely at Esther. "Where's Dan now?" "I had him cremated," Esther whispered, her voice laden with grief. "I'm going to spread his ashes in the places he loved most, far away from your godforsaken little kingdom." A sad, twisted smile appeared on Arthur's face. "My boy," he murmured, his voice dripping with regret. "When he was little, he was so bright and pure. Everyone adored him. Neighbors, friends, everyone. He was never half the student Oliver was, and his lack of focus scared me. But I've always had a soft spot for him." Arthur choked up. "But you're right. He was always desperate for my approval, and I withheld it." That's why he pushed himself so hard. That's why he's dead. Esther was just about to snap back at him when she noticed blood trickling from the corners of Arthur's lips. His strength was visibly fading, and he turned to her with a desperate look in his eyes. Esther, please, let me talk to him one last time. Unable to sustain her fury in the face of a dying man, Esther was overcome with a deep sadness. Fine. He's right here, she whispered, passing Arthur the delicately painted urn. Arthur's fingers twitched as he clutched the urn to his chest. Oh, Danny. Arthur's voice cracked, tears streaming down his face. I failed you. If I could do it all over. His voice trailed off, and a final tear trickled down his cheek. Then, in a heartwarming, wrenching moment, he slipped away. Despite Esther's best efforts to keep Arthur's passing quiet, the news was everywhere by the following morning. She had no interest in celebrating his life, but pressure from the Sloan and Davidson families was more intense than she expected, and she eventually agreed to plan his funeral. When the morning of his service arrived, all of the wealthiest citizens in the country were in attendance. Raindrops fell gently on the cemetery, and Esther stared gloomily at her uncle's freshly filled grave. She felt a discreet hand slip into hers. It was Xavier, offering comfort without speaking a word. Lifting her gaze, a raw pain in her eyes was evident. Dan's gone too, Xavier. None of this feels real. It's like I'm in a horrible nightmare. She paused, her thoughts swirling. And Oliver. He risked everything for me, and I have no idea what happened to him. Unaware of Esther's narrow escape from the inferno, Xavier squeezed her hand tighter. Risked everything. Esther, what happened? It's over now. It doesn't matter. She tried to pull her hand away, but Xavier held on, meeting her gaze with an intensity that conveyed more than he could ever in words. I'll be there, Esther. I promise. Just give me a little more time. Xavier's cousin Mackenzie suddenly emerged from the shadows. Xavier, it's time to go. Once everyone had left and darkness enveloped the cemetery, a lone figure approached, concealed beneath a black umbrella and a mask. Pausing at Arthur's grave, a visitor knelt down and laid a hand on the headstone. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he shrank back into the shadows. The next morning, Esther sought to distract herself with work, but was soon interrupted by one of the maids. Miss Williams, the Sloanes have extended an invitation to their banquet. Esther narrowed her eyes. What banquet? A memorial of sorts, they said, and a celebration of your continued prosperity. Esther's heart skipped a beat. She knew a trap when she saw one, but she reasoned that if she declined, whoever was after her would only grow more suspicious. The best she could hope to do was to be on alert and turn the tables when her enemies finally revealed themselves. The next evening, Esther arrived at the Sloanes' banquet in a simple yet elegant black gown, its simplicity punctuated only by a silver brooch, a nod to her mourning period. Upon her entrance, she immediately locked eyes with Xavier. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit and crisp tie, his once haggard features had regained their vigor. His refreshed appearance only served to heighten his commanding presence. As Esther made her way inside, Xavier stepped over with a wineglass in hand. Good to see you, Esther. She responded with a courteous smile. Xavier, always the gracious host. Together, they approached Carter and Gavin, and Esther handed over a gift. Gavin accepted it on his father's behalf, clinging to Esther's hand for an extra moment. Why didn't you give me a heads up? I could have picked you up at home and escorted you in. I'm quite capable of getting from place to place, Mr. Sloane. Unfazed, he poured her a glass of wine and joined me in a drink to your lovely presence in our home. Esther touched her glass to his, but only let the wine graze her lips. Given her doubts about Gavin and Mackenzie's intentions, she wanted to keep her wits about her. Before long, Xavier took the stage and welcomed their guests. Esther watched on with Gavin grumbling beside her, and she realized Xavier appeared different than she had ever seen him. Gone was the brooding, distant aura, and it had been replaced by magnetic confidence. He remained a man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone seemed to listen. Next to the preening Gavin, Xavier's charisma drew eyes like a beacon. Within minutes, Esther heard whispers fill the room, speculating about Xavier's potential. Directing the spotlight to the dance floor, Xavier stepped forward, and the bright glow of the light sharpened his features. He turned to Esther and extended his hand. "Miss Williams, may I have this dance?" A hint of amusement flickered in Esther's eyes, but her face remained composed. Gracefully, she stepped forward and took his hand. "The pleasure is all mine." As they began their captivating dance, she leaned in close, a hint of mischief in her voice. "You seem to remember our dance routine well for a man suffering from amnesia." Xavier smirked. "What can I say? The touch of your hand caused a miraculous recovery. With you by my side, I'll take over the Sloan family in no time." Esther's eyes sparkled with a challenge. "I never paid you for the kind of man that competes with the Gavins and Mackenzies of the world. What happened to make your own way?" Xavier let out a chuckle, pulling her body tightly against his. "Good thing it's not a competition. And by the time I'm finished with them, we'll never have to worry about their interference again." Esther struggled to suppress a smile, overjoyed that she'd finally be able to reconnect with Xavier after all this time. Unfortunately, as soon as their dance concluded, Gavin swiftly stepped in and took her hand. "Now that my dear cousin has had his turn, I'm certain you won't turn me down." He flashed her a playful grin. "Please don't. I might just shed a tear." With a twinkle in her eye, Esther responded, "On the contrary, I enjoy making men cry." "Then I'll give you tears of joy," Gavin shot back, and before she could protest, Gavin swept her back to the dance floor. Less than a minute later, Esther felt her head begin to spin. She initially wrote it off as low blood sugar, but then her steps suddenly faltered and she stumbled over Gavin's feet. Seizing her discomfort, Gavin pulled her close. "What seems to be the matter, Miss Williams? Are you feeling okay?" "I just need to catch my breath. I'll head to the lounge." She smiled tersely and tried to pull away, but Gavin wouldn't let her go. "The lounge will be too crowded. Allow me to take you somewhere more private." Then, as he pretended to adjust a stray strand of her hair, he discreetly released a vapor into her face. Esther's keen nose picked up on it right away, but the drug's effects were too fast. Within seconds, her senses were a blur, and her mind was scrambled. As she went limp in Gavin's arms, he gently guided her out of the room and down a private hallway to the far end of the mansion. Across the room, Xavier spotted Gavin and Esther just as he pulled her from the dance floor and slipped out of the room. But just as he moved to follow him, Mackenzie abruptly appeared and wrapped him in an embrace. "Dance with me, brother." Without so much as a glance in her direction, Xavier shrugged her off. "Not now, Mackenzie. I need to do something." He charged toward the corridor and left her scowling in his wake. As he stepped into the hallway that led to the other end of the building, it suddenly struck him just how many rooms the mansion housed, and he had no idea which one Esther was in. Xavier charged down the corridor, listening for any sign of Gavin or Esther, when a door suddenly swung open in front of him. He instinctively ducked behind a corner and watched as Gavin locked the door behind him and continued down the hall. Xavier's mind whirled as he watched for Gavin to disappear down the hall. What was his play? Was he planning to hand Esther off to someone else? Were Carter and Mackenzie aware? Shaking off his confusion, Xavier tiptoed up to the door and pulled a knife from his pocket. Quickly jimmying the lock and letting himself through, inside, he found Esther weak and barely conscious. He furrowed his brow in concern and bent out to whisper in her ear. "Esther, What did they do to you? Drugs? The sound of his voice seemed to momentarily cut through her fog. And as she gritted her teeth in determination, biting her tongue to keep the drowsiness at bay. That asshole Gavin, she muttered. Reach under my dress. What? Xavier leaned back in shock, but quickly saw that she was serious. Not like that, you idiot. There's a nasal spray strapped to my left thigh. Use it on me. Quick. Xavier lifted her dress, and his fingers brushed up the inside of her thigh, locating the spray bottle and unholstering it. He delivered a quick spray in each nostril, and her senses immediately sharpened. Shaking off the fog, she gave him more instructions. There's another device on the opposite leg. When you get the opportunity, use it on Gavin. What are you, James Bond? Esther smirked. I knew this party was a trap, so I dug up some useful tools in Arthur's room. Gavin made his move. Now it's time for some payback. Esther finally managed to swing her feet off the bed, and Xavier supported her as they made their way back into the corridor and down the hall to another room. Xavier summoned Jonathan's bodyguards to watch over her, then returned to the room where he found Esther. Slipping into a shadow in the corner of the room, Xavier gripped the spray that Esther had given him and waited for Gavin to return. His cousin had been out to get him since the day he arrived, likely much earlier, and Xavier was finished playing his games. Coming for him was one thing, but involving Esther was unacceptable. Before long, Gavin unlocked the door and stepped inside, freezing as he saw that Esther was missing. Before he could react, Xavier sprung forward and delivered a full dose of Esther's spray to Gavin's face. Reeling, Gavin locked eyes with Xavier and lit up with rage. You set me up! Xavier stared him down. I set you up? Oh, cousin, you don't think I'm that stupid, do you? Gavin's eyes narrowed, drawing a dagger. I should be asking you that. Gavin lunged forward, and Xavier leaped back into a bookcase, sending countless family heirlooms clattering to the floor. Gavin stabbed at Xavier again, grazing his chest with the blade, but Xavier struck back, locking Gavin's arm behind him and pinning him against the wall. Gavin's strength rapidly waned as the effects of Esther's spray assaulted his system. So Xavier slammed him against the wall to keep him awake. Why the anonymous calls to Esther? Xavier demanded, gripping the dagger in Gavin's hand. Gavin managed a sardonic smile, sweat beading on his forehead. Guess you're not as naive as my sources claimed. You threatened Esther and her family all in order to get me? Congratulations, Sherlock, Gavin responded, a hint of frustration lacing his voice. Though I admit I didn't think you'd be this hard to take out. Sorry to disappoint. Xavier slammed Gavin's head against the wall again, grimacing as he felt the old wound on his side threatening to reopen. Gavin's face reddened, his voice weak. I can't believe I fell for your ridiculous amnesia act. Why are you so obsessed with that Williams girl anyways? She's a token, Xavier. A bargaining chip. Xavier seethed with pain, sweat forming on his brow as he pressed his hand against the wound on his side. But he refused to release his grip on Gavin. You know, you and your sister, you're so obsessed with your inheritance that you never learned what it means to live. Esther loves me, and when I die, that's what I'll be grateful for. You'll die the same way you've lived, desperate and alone. A flash of anger lit up Gavin's face, and with a final burst of energy, he shoved Xavier off of him. Just then, the door burst open and Xavier's bodyguards entered. Xavier's distraction left an opening for Gavin, but as he staggered forward with his blade outstretched, Xavier's bodyguard dove in and disarmed him, knocking him unconscious with a single blow to the head. As soon as Xavier confirmed Gavin was still alive, he looked back at his bodyguards. Where is Esther? I told you to watch her. She got a phone call and left in a hurry, insisted we stay behind to help you. Or from the sounds of it, we've had an ally helping deal with Gavin behind the scenes. When Miss Williams answered her phone, she said the name Oliver. I'm on it. Xavier grunted, leaning heavily against the doorframe. We should have someone look at your wound, sir. Just get me to Esther's room, Xavier snapped. At that moment, Esther weaved her way through a lush garden before stopping in front of a flower bed. As moonlight filtered through the trees, she locked eyes with a figure waiting in the distance. Standing tall and proud, he sported a crisp suit with a mask obscuring his face. Esther's breath caught as she realized it was actually him. Oliver had returned. She dashed forward and wrapped him in a hug, but Oliver remained still. The events of the past few days bore down on Esther like lead weights, and words jumbled in her throat. Oliver, your brother. I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. He trusted me to care for him, and instead, I let him go through with the surgery. We were so scared. I'm sorry. Tears streamed down her face, and before she could continue, Oliver wrapped his arms tightly around her, holding her close. His voice crackled with emotion. It's not your fault, Esther. Some things are just out of our control. You, of all people, should know that. You loved him. You did what you thought was right. And ultimately, it was his decision to make. Esther pulled back, shaking her head. I should have fought him on it. But so much has happened in your absence. And then your father. Oliver cut in, his voice firm. There's no need to explain. I'm aware of everything. Suddenly, a realization hit Esther. Glancing up, she locked eyes with him. Why are you wearing that mask? Did something happen to you? During the fire? Oliver remained silent, but as Esther reached to remove his mask, he swiftly caught her wrist. Don't, he warned. Tears welled in her eyes. This is my fault too. Don't you see, Oliver? Every bad thing that's happened is because of me. Every decision I made was my own, and I would make them again. I'll find a way to heal. It's just a matter of time. Esther was at a loss for words. Then Oliver continued. When you were on your balcony, you asked me some questions. Do you still want the answers? Esther could only nod. Oliver took a deep breath and locked eyes with her. I want you to know that every step of the way, I did what I had to. I had no choice. And when I did, there were no good options. What did you do, Oliver? His body stiffened and his gaze turned cold and detached. I transferred the explosives that were used in Mexico. My father wanted me to set up Steve. Same with Jonathan on James' yacht. I also knew about Stark's plans. I didn't intervene or warn the Johnsons. My father set the trap for them before I was old enough to know, and by the time I did, I felt powerless to stop it. Esther gasped, her world crumbling before her. You aided our enemies? He met her gaze unflinchingly. Yes, Esther, and I won't try to justify my actions. I'm ruthless because I have to be. I can only care for a select few. The rest, their fates don't concern me. But Stark, he pushed me into the ocean. I went blind. I nearly died. Oliver softened, his tone conveying genuine guilt. I'm sorry, Esther. I didn't know he had designs on you. Your father told me you had taken a teaching job out of the country, and I believed him. By the time I found out what had happened and went to find you, you'd already returned to the States, and Stark was as good as finished. He reached out, gently brushing away Esther's tears. You have to believe I would never stand by and let anything happen to you. Esther turned away, her voice strained with emotion. Nancy was my best friend, Oliver. She was practically your sister. How could you stand to see her suffer like that? And her innocent parents? Tears flowed freely as she lashed out, striking Oliver in the chest. He flinched but didn't stop her, even as his burned and bandaged skin turned bright red. Suddenly, Esther paused, her eyes widening. In the moonlight, she noticed the dark red stains spreading across Oliver's shirt. She gasped. Are you bleeding? I'll be fine. Staring at the man before her, Esther broke into a wrenching sob. How could she reconcile the fact that he had undergone such torment on her behalf, while allowing the most unspeakable things to happen to everyone she loved? As if he could read her mind, he reached out and put a comforting hand on her shoulder. I've always been upfront, Esther. I'm no saint. I did what I had to. Esther shot back, desperation in her voice. No one has to kill innocent people. How am I supposed to look at you, knowing you value so many lives so little? I truly am sorry, Esther. The two shared a heavy silence before she finally whispered. Where did you go after the fire? Did you go back to Houston? To our family? Oliver paused. Houston isn't my home, Esther, and I would never harm your parents, but they aren't my family. Then what does that make me? You're Esther. You're different. You always have been, and deep down, I think you know that. After a lengthy pause, he stepped forward and gently took her hands in his. Together, we could run the Williams family in a new way, move on from Arthur and his petty grudges, chart our own course, build our own dynasty. Esther couldn't believe what she was hearing. She stammered, her eyes still wet with unshed tears. How about it, Esther? Would you consider staying? For me? Esther was seized by guilt as she considered Oliver's request. As much as she cared for him, there was no way she could stay. I'm sorry, Oliver, but this isn't my home. If I hadn't been looking after Dan, I would have already been gone. Oliver nodded in disappointment. I understand. I'll make sure you can leave as soon as possible. But can I ask you something? Of course. Is there something between you and Xavier? Esther's eyes dropped as she nodded. There is, and has been for a long time, well before either of us knew what was happening here. He's important to you, isn't he? Oliver persisted. Yes. Oliver's gaze intensified. Thank you for being honest. I'll be heading back to the family estate tomorrow, and then you're free to leave. But what about your injury? It's a flesh wound, he said nonchalantly. And if you want Xavier to leave with you, I'll sort it out. Esther blinked in surprise. Is it that simple? For you, anything is simple. Now come with me. We have one more thing to do. As she followed him, he pulled out his phone and dialed Mackenzie, putting it on speakerphone. Her voice tremored as she answered. Oliver, is it really you? It is. Meet me in the lounge in the East Wing. Her voice faltered. What are you saying? Are you going to meet me or not? Mackenzie paused, then responded confidently. I'm on my way. Walking beside glanced at him in confusion. Is this serious? Is there something between you and Mackenzie? Oliver laughed dryly. She wishes. I have no interest in someone as thoughtless as her. But if you're trying to leave this mess behind, Mackenzie's your ticket. Just stick with me. We're in for a show. Mackenzie paused outside the door of the lounge, taking a deep breath before knocking gently. When no one responded, she eased the door open and stepped into a dimly lit room. Before her eyes could even adjust, a forceful grip caught her wrist, and she smelled a sharp, acrid odor. Her senses immediately began to fray, and within moments, darkness claimed her. Confirming Mackenzie was unconscious, Oliver turned to Esther and handed the spray back to her, his eyes swirling with emotions she couldn't decipher. Leave the rest to me. You and Xavier will be able to return home tomorrow. A pang of unease hit Esther. Why don't you come with me? Can't you just walk away from all of this? He smiled sadly. If I could, I would have years ago. He pointed down the corridor. Xavier's in the last room. Word is he's injured. Concern clouded Esther's features. I need to see him. Oliver nodded, and Esther headed off, glancing over her shoulder. I'll be right back. No. Surprised by Oliver's forcefulness, Esther paused, turning back. What do you mean? His gaze, once stormy, now held a quiet intensity. Stay in there with Xavier. Whatever you hear, don't come out." "All right." Minutes later, Theo hurriedly led a group of guests down the hall toward the lounge. Hearing nothing on the other side, he eased the door open and his jaw dropped in shock. In the middle of the room, Mackenzie and Gavin sat side by side, unconscious and tied to their chairs. In their laps were file boxes, each containing meticulously prepared evidence of every wrong they had committed against the party guests flooding into the room. Oliver had found every skeleton in the Sloane siblings' closets and hung them out for everyone to see. Gavin and Mackenzie would never be respected again. Within 5 minutes, everyone in the building seemed to know the gruesome details of Gavin and Mackenzie's misdeeds. Every deal they had stolen, every relationship they had poisoned, and every friend they had betrayed. When Xavier finally emerged from his room at the end of the hall, he was stunned to find the house in a state of utter turmoil. Carter looked so apologetic, he was on the verge of collapsing, and everyone in attendance seemed mired in outrage and gossip. Xavier's bodyguards quickly briefed him, and after exchanging a charged look with Esther, he hurried to the front of the room and took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, we arrived here tonight as friends and family, and it is the way we ought to leave. My cousins are not perfect people, but who here is? Who here hasn't made compromises in the course of doing business?" The room fell silent, punctuated by murmurs. Xavier's words were uncomfortable, but they were also true. Now then, we can allow tonight's revelations to tear us apart, to destroy the mutual prosperities our families have worked so hard to build. Or we can let bygones be bygones. Personally, I have chosen the latter. As many of you know, I was gravely injured during a recent trip and have yet to fully recover. My wound even reopened tonight. If I can move beyond that, we can move beyond anything. I'm afraid I have to leave you all to recuperate, but on behalf of Carter and the rest of my family, please accept my sincerest apologies. I promise to make it up to all of you in due time." Cheers arose from the crowd as Xavier gingerly stepped down from the stage. He had succeeded in lowering the temperature, but he knew that the fire was far from extinguished. After all, in power struggles among the elite, the only thing that mattered was outcomes, and the victors would be the ones to write history. While he had suddenly risen to the likeliest heir within the Sloane family, they had all gained enemies. And if Arthur's story was any indication, grudges were not so easy to dispel. The next morning, Xavier and Carter were deliberating in the library when an assistant entered with a grave expression. "Sir, I just received news that Oliver Williams has returned." Carter's eyes narrowed, a chill settling on his face. "So it was him that orchestrated all this." He turned to Xavier and smiled ruefully. "I admit, I suspected you." "Understandable. Of all the potential options, I had the most to gain." "You handled yourself well last night, Xavier. You did the Sloane family a great service." "I admit that Gavin and I don't see eye to eye, and I strongly disagree with how he handles himself, but there are lines I won't cross. I would never harm my own family just to get ahead." "I can see that, which is exactly why I have an intriguing proposition for you." Later that morning at the Williams residence, Esther waited outside to welcome Oliver home. As he stepped out of his sleek black car and approached Esther, he touched her shoulder. "As promised, your flight is booked, but you and Xavier better get going." She met his eyes with concern. "Are you sure you can handle all of this alone?" A hint of a smirk played on his lips, eyes alive with fire behind his mask. "The Sloane siblings? I've been handling them for years. They couldn't hurt me if they tried." Within an hour, 2 vehicles were en route to the airport, one from the Sloane family and one from the Williams family. Thanks to his performance the night before, Xavier had been given full access to the Sloane family's international ventures, and his trip back to New York was to be a test of his capabilities. If he could advance Carter's interests, he would be that much closer to inheriting everything. As they stepped out of their cars at the airport, Oliver handed Esther her bag. "New York is closer than you think. Stay vigilant." "I will. You'll see someone about your injury?" He shrugged. "In due time." Grabbing her passport, Esther paused, her voice filled with genuine concern. "I already lost one brother. Promise me I won't lose another." "I promise." As they exchanged a final charged look, Xavier nudged Esther gently. "We should get going." Esther hesitated. She was desperate to convince Oliver to return to New York with her, to live a more normal life. But she knew she couldn't sway him. His path had been long set before, and she understood that his resolve was only hardened by the loss of Dan and Arthur. He may have been chosen to live among a den of lions, but Esther now saw that he was a lion himself. Sensing Esther's conflicted emotions, he stepped back and smiled. "Tell Dan goodbye for me, and get moving, or you'll miss your flight." She wiped away her tears and nodded as Oliver turned to Xavier. "Look after her, okay?" "I will, and thank you for everything, especially yesterday." "Don't be fooled, Mr. Sloan. I did that for my family." With that, Xavier clasped Esther's hand and swiftly guided her through the security checkpoint, their bodyguards close on their heels. Back in the main lobby, Oliver stood rooted to his spot, his eyes tracking Esther until she disappeared into the throng. As she was about to vanish from his view, she turned and waved, silently mouthing, "Goodbye, big bro." He nodded in acknowledgement, lingering on the image of her merging with the crowd. When Esther and Xavier landed in New York, Nancy was waiting to meet them. She and Esther had an unimaginable amount to catch up on, and with Xavier needing more rest, the two women had decided to head straight to Los Angeles to spread Dan's ashes in the place he loved the most. By the following day, they found themselves in the beating heart of Hollywood. Early summer had painted the town in vibrant colors, and awestruck tourists bumped shoulders with the entertainment professionals rushing between meetings. Holding the urn to her chest, Esther led the way into the Hollywood Hills, and she and Nancy walked in somber silence until they arrived at the foot of the iconic Hollywood sign. Each said their heartfelt goodbyes, and Esther opened Dan's urn, allowing his ashes to scatter with the wind. When the job was finally done, they started back down the hill. Just as they arrived back on Hollywood Boulevard, Esther received a pin drop from Oliver. He had included no explanation, but the spot was exactly 2 blocks from where they stood. Pulling up her GPS, Esther took Nancy's hand and walked them to the location Oliver had indicated. When she finally came to a stop, Nancy's grip on her hand suddenly tightened. "Oh my God, Esther! It's Dan!" As Esther looked up from her phone, her heart skipped a beat and her eyes flooded with tears. Oliver had gotten Dan a star on the Walk of Fame. Kneeling down in front of it, Esther placed her palm in the center of the star and closed her eyes. Memories of his smiling face swirled in her mind, and she couldn't help but laugh. All he'd ever wanted was to make an impact in Hollywood, and now he was permanently etched into the fabric of the city. Promising to visit him the next chance she got, Esther wiped her tears and got back to her feet. Dan was gone, but he would never be forgotten. When Nancy arrived back in New York, her time was immediately consumed by the buzz around Bright Star. Attention on the company had been unrelenting since her press conference, and it took nearly a full day for her to sort through her interview requests alone. On the afternoon of her first day back, Nancy was sifting through a torrent of emails when a knock interrupted her. Her secretary stepped in with a confused look. "Miss Miller, a man named Dorian just finished his 3rd round of interviews and claims he's related to you." Nancy leaned back in surprise. She hadn't heard from Jonathan's cousin since they had all landed in New York, and she assumed he was on vacation, not a job hunt. It crossed her mind that he might have been sent by Matthew to watch her and report back, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was different from the rest of this family. Walking into the lounge, she saw him sitting on a couch and flipping through a contract. His eyes sparkled on seeing her. What's up, Maria? Nancy's brow furrowed in slight irritation. Quickly adjusting, Dorian sat up straight and changed his tone. Sorry, boss. I didn't mean any disrespect. Just excited that I aced the interview and wanted to share the good news. Nancy motioned for her secretary to exit the room before settling into the sofa. What position did you apply for? Graphic artist. Dorian boasted with a hint of pride. That role requires considerable artistic skills and a deep understanding of the game. And your relationship with me won't help you. Are you sure you're up for that? I sketched this during the interview. Dorian slid a detailed artwork toward Nancy, the gleam in his eyes signaling his pride. The illustration showcased a vast, captivating ocean, its depths hiding a long-forgotten city. Nancy was genuinely taken aback. This is impressive. Did you learn to draw like this? Dorian smirked. While my brothers and cousins were all fighting each other over a slice of the family business, I learned art and music. Nancy nodded in admiration. When's your official start date? Tomorrow. And don't worry, I won't tell your other employees that you don't always act like the elder stateswoman when you're not at work. Nancy chuckled. If you should be worrying about anyone's behavior outside of work, it should be your own. Dorian feigned indignation. Hey now, you may have married an older man, but I'm still older than you. Nancy leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dripping with mischief. Friendly reminder, Dorian, we're on my turf now, and that old man you're mocking created the company you want to work for. Dorian huffed. You're also obsessed with turf. You should really lighten up. With that, Dorian winked and strode out of her office. A part of her couldn't believe she was actually taking him on as an employee, but he seemed genuinely talented. And in the worst-case scenario, where he did turn out to be his uncle's spy, Nancy would rather keep him close enough to watch. Nancy remained buried in work for the rest of the week, but when Sunday finally rolled around, she was able to breathe a sigh of relief. With Arthur gone, the cloud that had loomed over the Davis family had dispersed, and Jonathan had decided to throw a celebration at the family's sprawling house in the Hamptons. They invited their closest friends and family for the all-day barbecue, and by 10 a.m., guests began to arrive. Peter and Emma appeared together, just as Nancy and Ashley were indulging in some skewers, and Jonathan was helping Katie with her schoolwork. Perched on a stool under the awning, Katie chewed on the back of her pen and was about to ask Jonathan a question when she looked up and spotted Emma. Her heart skipped a beat as the pen dropped from her mouth, and she scrambled to pick it up. When she sat up straight again, Emma was standing directly in front of her. Hey, I remember you. Katie took a deep breath, desperately trying to look calm in front of her crush. Oh yeah, you're Emma, right? Good memory. Emma's gaze flicked to Katie's workbook, and she arched an eyebrow. Math Olympiad? You know school is out, right? You can take a break from studying. Katie shook her head. Not when you want to get into Yale. Peter widened his eyes. Geez, the middle school's gotten a lot more competitive since my day. I'm in high school. Emma smirked. Still, just a kid. Katie stammered in embarrassment and looked back at her math problem, but it was clear to everyone that she didn't understand it. After solving it incorrectly and erasing it for the second time, Katie suddenly heard Emma's voice gently correcting her mistake. Katie turned to face her, cheeks aflame with a mix of gratitude and teenage adoration. Thanks. I mean, I probably could have gotten it on my own, but still. Emma's lips curled into a smile. No problem. Next time you need help, just ask. I think you might have a sunburn, by the way. Your cheeks are bright red. Nearby, Nancy and Ashley had finished prepping the kebabs when Steve approached with a tray of seasonings, and everyone began to marinate their selections. Latham and Esther had just arrived, and he quickly made his way to the center of the group where he eyed the kebabs with skepticism. No offense, but this isn't much of a barbecue. Nancy began to respond, But Ashley jumped in defensively. What's wrong with them? Nothing. They're perfect, just like you. But don't you think we could use a side dish? He held up a bag of freshly caught oysters and winked at Ashley. Peter elbowed him from the side. Sad you have to rely on aphrodisiacs, Latham. Latham shot back, arching an eyebrow. Grilled oysters happen to be my favorite food. He paused, smirking. And if they happen to get women in the mood for romance, then so be it. Peter clapped Latham on the back. Good luck with that. Everyone here is either married or related to Jonathan. Overhearing their banter, Katie looked up at Emma. I don't understand. What's the deal with oysters? That's a secret for the adults. Why don't you stick to your math? I'm not a little kid, you know. You're only like 6 years older than me. That's less than the difference between Maria and my uncle. I didn't mean anything by it. Let's find a harder problem to work on. Emma grabbed Katie's notebook, and as she started to turn the page, Katie's eyes went wide with horror. She had scribbled Emma's name all over the next page. Screaming in panic, Katie lunged at Emma, but as she snatched her notebook away, her momentum sent her tumbling into Emma's lap before they both went rolling off the side of the porch. The pair landed in a heap on the grass below, with everyone staring on in stunned silence. Emma's warmth enveloped Katie, her scent overpowering her senses. She lay there, stunned for a moment, before finally blurting out. Oh my God, I'm sorry. Are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm such a clumsy idiot. Tears welled up in her eyes as Emma shook off the fall and gently moved Katie off of her. Geez, kid, how much do you weigh? Eyes bright with unshed tears, Katie shot back. I'm not that heavy, and I'm not a kid. Emma winced as she propped herself up and inspected her hand. In the chaos of the fall, she'd instinctively grabbed the edge of the porch and cut her palm on a sharp stone. Katie noticed the cut and gasped. Oh my gosh, you're bleeding. We need to take care of it. Don't worry about it. Just a scratch. But it could get infected. At least let me clean and bandage it. Without waiting for Emma to agree, Katie leapt to her feet and grabbed Emma's uninjured hand, pulling her toward the house with surprising force. Laughing at Katie's insistence, Emma stood up and followed behind her. All right. We might as well get the dirt out. But let's slow down before you run someone else over. With a quick glare over her shoulder, Katie dragged Emma inside and ushered her into the bathroom. Turning on both water taps and waiting until the temperature was just right, she thrust Emma's hand under the steam and gently applied soap. Emma flinched, and Katie looked up at her with guilt. Sorry, am I being too rough? No, it's fine. I'm almost done. As Katie cleaned the last speck of dirt from Emma's cut, she suddenly realized that their fingers were intertwined. Jerking her hand away in surprise, she stepped back from Emma and handed her a towel. All done. Thanks, kiddo. Katie narrowed her eyes. Do you even know my name? Of course. It's Kara. No, it's not. Emma burst out laughing. It's so easy with you. Seriously, Katie, you have to learn to take things a little less seriously. Katie blushed yet again and spun away from Emma, opening the medicine cabinet to get the Band-Aids. She spotted the box on the top shelf, and just as she was about to drag over a stool to get it, she felt the warmth of Emma's body behind her, reaching past her face and plucking the Band-Aids off the shelf. Katie wanted to snap at Emma so that she could do it on her own, but as she turned to face her, her eyes were suddenly aligned perfectly with Emma's chest. Memories of their recent closeness flooded her senses, and she abruptly turned away. The unrelenting series of embarrassment was almost more than Katie could bear. As her mind whirled with self-recriminations, Emma bandaged her hand and replaced the Band-Aids on the top shelf, reaching past Katie one last time. All right, good as new. Now what do you say we go see if the boys finally got the grill up and running? Katie nodded and walked out of the room without saying a word. But Emma quickly found her way alongside her. Hey, Katie, what do you say we arrange a time for you to come see our lab? Really? Sure. You said you wanted to work in robotics when you grow up, right? Katie glared at her, and Emma rolled her eyes. Sorry, when you finish high school. That's right. And I don't just want to. I'm going to. Good. Then all the more reason for you to get a head start. We only take the best of the best, you know? I'm going to be number one, just like you. Technically, I was number two to your aunt. Then she leaned in to whisper in Katie's ear. But don't tell her. I took it easy on her in the finals. Katie burst out in laughter, and as she exited the house into the backyard, Emma gave her a friendly squeeze on the shoulder. It was the innocent act of a woman who was oblivious to Katie's infatuation, but for the teenage girl in the throes of forbidden love, the gesture was electric. Though it only lasted a mere moment, the sensation coursed through Katie's body, filling her heart and etching itself permanently in her mind. Jonathan and Nancy's barbecue was in full swing when to the grill, shooting Ashley a playful smirk. Watch and learn how kebabs are truly mastered. He expertly tamed the flames using a water bottle, and Peter laughed. You ever think of a side gig flipping kebabs? The city can never have too many halal carts. Grinning, Batham flexed theatrically. I can see it now. Me selling gourmet lamb skewers in the heart of the financial district. With this charm, I'll draw lines around the block and over the bridge. Esther rolled her eyes, teasing. Yeah, but could you rock the stood in the sun too long smelling like grilled meat look? Maybe I could concoct a fragrance for you. Ooh, they barbecued lamb. The gang burst out laughing, Latham, still chuckling, sidled up to Ashley. Even smelling like a grill, I'd still be a catch. Right, Ash? She playfully pushed him off. Keep dreaming. Off to the side, Jonathan was the picture of relaxation, holding a frosty beer and wearing a white tee paired with black jeans. Nancy, naturally, was his mirror image in a black tee and white jeans. Their simple coordination was striking, and Jonathan's calm confidence made them the center of everyone's attention. Spotting it, Latham called out to them. Hey, Jonathan, you've already got the girl. Who are you trying to impress? Jonathan looked up, a sly grin on his face. Little advice, Latham. No matter how long you've been together, you've got to keep the romance alive. Latham chuckled, nudging Peter. Who'd have thought the ruthless, decisive Mr. Davis would turn out to be such a Romeo? Given who he tied the knot with, not surprised at all. Latham feigned shock. You know, ever since you joined Bright Star, you've become the captain of Team Maria. I need my wingman back. With a smirk, Peter raised his drink. Sorry, bud. I'm someone else's co-pilot now. As Latham playfully lunged at him, Peter dodged, setting off a chase. Jonathan laughed at their jovial games and turned to Ashley. I'm always surprised when Latham gets like this, especially since Olivia died. That was his wife, right? For less than a day before she died, but they really did love each other. I know how broken up he was about it. I just hate the idea of him spending the rest of his life alone. A guy like that shouldn't have any trouble when he decides he's ready. He's like a golden retriever. Jonathan bounced his eyebrows. Got something to tell me there, sis? No, of course not. I'm just saying. Ashley blushed and glanced around for an out, finally spotting Nancy prepping a fruit salad at a nearby table. She stepped over and started helping, then looked up at Nancy with an earnest expression. Maria, what's it like being married? Nancy considered her response. I guess it's all about who you share it with. Ashley hummed, and Nancy clocked her hesitance to pry, so she smiled reassuringly. It's okay to be curious. You certainly don't have anything to hide. With Jonathan, everything just feels right. I never thought it was possible to be this happy, And then one day, I was. I guess in some ways it was just dumb luck. But I like to think there was a little fate involved. Ashley sank back, letting Nancy's words wash over her. You're so lucky, Maria. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever find. She hesitated, then confessed. I've always been a bit of a diva. Being here, without everyone bending over backwards for me, it's been humbling. Maybe that's why I don't click with people. Nancy looked at Ashley with compassion. You know, it's all about growth. Just recognizing you want to change is a big deal. She paused. Maybe you haven't found your tribe yet. But I've got looks, brains, and ambition. What else do I need? Grinning, Nancy handed her a slice of kiwi. When I'm feeling stuck, I find a way to shake it up. A new job, maybe a new hobby. Anything that gets you out and meeting new people. Obviously, you're always welcome here. It's important to have a community that truly feels like your own. A light sparked in Ashley's eyes. Thanks, Maria. That makes a lot of sense. Growing more spirited, she shouted to the whole party. That's it. I'm embracing the single life. This is the year of Ashley. Everyone's attention turned to her, and Latham burst out laughing. You better be careful where you scream that, Ash. Not all men are as polite as the ones here. Ashley smirked at him. And not all the men here are as polite as they think they are. The crowd laughed at Ashley's jab, and before long, the group sat down for their meal. As they all finished eating, Latham elbowed Jonathan and bounced his eyebrows. So, Mr. Davis, what's on the agenda tonight? Jonathan shrugged. What are you thinking? Oh, I don't know. Drinks, cards, cigars? Noticing the women shooting disinterested glances, Latham laughed. Easy, ladies. Just brainstorming here. Jonathan sized up Latham with a playful glint in his eye. Well, since you seem to have so much energy, why don't we head inside, and I'll show you what Maria and I have planned. As the group climbed the stairs to the second floor, Latham saw an impressive spread of gym equipment before them and rolled his eyes dramatically. You can't be serious. I thought this was supposed to be a party. Nancy's laughter chimed in. Well, welcome to boot camp, gentlemen. We're hitting the gym now? Really? Jonathan grinned widely, clapping his hands. Absolutely. No better way to burn off a big lunch. Familiar with Jonathan's grueling workout regime, Nancy started first, quickly shifting through the routine she and Jonathan designed for the weekends. She began with a warm-up, transitioned to strength training, and concluded with cardio. Ashley, meanwhile, stood in front of a machine looking uncomfortable. Spotting it, Latham sidled up next to her. Need some assistance? She shot him a dubious look. You? At the gym? I bet $50 there's no six-pack hiding under there. Latham's grin grew wider, and he struck a mock pose, teasingly lifting his shirt. Let's make it double. Seriously? Ashley scoffed, but reached out, feeling the smooth ridges of well-sculpted muscles beneath his tank top. She met his eyes, her hands still resting on his abs. Well, color me impressed. Laughing, Latham drew her into a side hug. I've always been an undercover overachiever. I may have slipped through all my classes, but that's because I was already making more money than my professors. Ashley stifled as a ripple of excitement shot down her spine, only to have Latham lean in, his voice a husky undertone. Remember, appearances can be tricky. Just stick with me and I'll teach you all the ins and outs. His voice, a blend of humor and warmth, grazed her ear, causing a shiver to snake down her arm. Ashley pulled away a tad, her brows knitting. So much for being polite. Latham shot her a roguish grin. Who said I was talking about myself? Hardly matters when you're all talk and no action. Without flinching, Latham took Ashley by the wrist and pressed her hand against his chest muscles. Feel those? Not just for show. As she was about to fire back, the steady pulse beneath her fingers rendered her speechless. Latham chuckled softly, changing his tone. All right, no more games. Here's the deal. Sit up, keep your back aligned, and relax those shoulders. When you pull, it's all about those back muscles. Taking his lead, Ashley adjusted herself. Like this? Latham gave an approving nod. Exactly. Feel that burn across your back? I've got it, Ashley confirmed. Good. Do a set of 20. Then I'll coach you on the next one. As Latham walked Ashley through the equipment, she slowly realized the duality of his character. Behind his playful demeanor was a man with extraordinary focus and a gift for communication. In an instant, he had transformed from the class clown to the charismatic professor. As they finished their routine, Ashley turned to him with hesitation in her voice. Hey, Latham, would it be okay if I join you at the gym again sometime? He looked surprised, one eyebrow arching playfully. What about your brothers? I'd hate to make all the men in your life jealous. Ashley let out an exasperated sigh. They're always preoccupied. Jonathan's lost in his own world with Maria, and Brock has no time for me between chasing Hannah and trying to rebuild his company. Latham laughed. Then consider me your third brother. And that applies to the year of Ashley, too. When the boys come running, don't worry, I'll vet them for you. Ashley's fingers instinctively tightened, a pit forming in her stomach at the idea of Latham being her brother. Suppressing her emotions, she managed to nod in agreement. It's a deal. Thanks, bro. Don't worry, I'll send Jonathan the bill for my services. With a wink, Latham spun around and strolled toward Jonathan, who was doing push-ups with Nancy perched playfully on his back. Latham groaned. Seriously, you two. We're all stuffed from the feast. Spare us the extra serving of PDA. Jonathan smiled playfully, and each time he pushed upwards, Nancy would bend down and kiss him on the head. When he hit his 20th rep, she hopped off and grabbed him a towel. Latham shot a cocky grin. Think you're the big man here, Jonathan? Taking a long gulp from his water bottle, Jonathan met Latham's gaze. Care to prove me wrong, Latham? You're on. Latham got down in a push-up position and shouted to the room. All right, which one of you ladies is up for the challenge? But before any of the women could answer, Peter leaped forward. Allow me to do the honors, but I am not going to kiss your head. Laughter rippled through the room, and Latham pointed to Esther. How about it, Esther? I used to do this with Olivia in college. Esther waved him off, but everyone began chanting for her to do it. Just as she stepped toward Latham, the gym door swung open. Everyone turned to see Xavier step inside, still wearing immaculate business attire from his full day of meetings. With a hint of mischief in his eyes, he sauntered over to Latham. Did I hear you were about to show off with my girlfriend? I swear to God, it's like you have bat ears, Xavier. As the room filled with laughter, Esther turned to Xavier with a surprised look. I thought you were working late tonight. Wrapped up faster than I thought, he replied, pulling her close. Lowering his voice, he added, I couldn't bear the thought of you being here all alone, or sitting on Latham's back. A bright smile spread across her face. When did you become such a softie? What could I say? My wife brings out the best in me. Esther giggled and pulled him close, then suddenly realized what he said and pulled away, her eyes wide with shock. I'm sorry, what did you just call me? It was almost 9 o'clock in the evening. Nancy and Jonathan had wanted to drive Ashley home, but Latham had offered to take her instead, since her house was on its way. Ashley sat, lost in thought in the passenger seat of Latham's convertible, as her hair blew in the warm, early summer breeze. Latham stopped at a red light and turned to look at her. "I couldn't believe you were Brock's sister, but now I see the resemblance." Ed was surprised. "What resemblance do you see?" "Your facial features, like your eyebrows and nose." There was a moment of silence before he thought of something else to say. "Seriously, though, do you really want me to introduce you to someone?" She shrugged as he stepped on the gas pedal. "Maybe. My sister-in-law keeps telling me to meet someone outside of my circle. All my friends are females, and I'm in the jewelry business, which means I don't ever meet any single men." "Have you considered going into a different line of work?" Latham asked, glancing at her. "Like what?" She sighed and shook her head. "I just want to meet someone nice." "Why don't you come and work for my company? You graduated from a good university and you're smart." "That's true," she agreed. "My grades were excellent. Do you think you can get me in?" Latham nodded. "If your brother agrees, we really need more women at the company. 80% of the people at the company are men." "Will I need to go for an interview?" He shook his head. "I'm the head of the company, so I can hire whoever I want." Ashley bit her lip and smiled. "Does that mean I have to call you Mr. Myers at the office?" Latham laughed. "You can call me boss." She grimaced. "It sounds so formal." He turned a corner and drove toward Ashley's gated community. They soon arrived in front of her building, and he got out of the car to escort her to the door. She climbed out of the passenger seat and held up her hand. "That's okay. I can walk up by myself." "Are you sure?" he asked, looking around. "I wouldn't want anything to happen to you." He took her arm, and they walked up the pathway. "Is Brock home?" Latham asked. "I'm not sure. He's been so busy lately that he often only comes home in the middle of the night." Ashley took out her phone and checked to see whether he had messaged her. "It's a good thing I wasn't in New York when Hannah was in trouble. Otherwise, I would have beaten the daylights out of him," Latham remarked. They entered the building, and he pressed the elevator button. "How are the two of them doing now?" Ashley frowned. "Hannah went away, and Brock followed her. He was with her for about 2 weeks, and then he came back. I asked him about it, but he refused to tell me anything." Latham was about to say something when the elevator door opened, and a man stumbled out. Latham grabbed Ashley's arm and pulled her out of the way. The man was drunk and cursed loudly as he staggered past them. Latham and Ashley walked into the elevator, but a hand suddenly reached in as the door was about to close. Ashley gasped and hid behind Latham as the drunk man got into the elevator and pressed a button. Latham pressed the button for Ashley's floor and stood in front of her protectively. They waited in silence as the elevator went up, and the man got out on the next floor. They breathed a collective sigh of relief as the door closed behind him. A moment later, they arrived on Ashley's floor. "It's the first door to the left," she told Latham. She took her keys out of her purse and opened the door. "That drunk scared me to death. I felt like we were in some awful horror movie." "You've clearly been watching too many movies," he said, looking around casually. "I guess I'll be going now." She nodded. "Drive safely." "I'll let my head of HR know you'll be coming to work for us. I can set up a meeting for you at the marketing department." He suddenly stopped in the doorway as a thought occurred to him. "Why don't you try getting a job at the Davis Group?" She shook her head. "No, I don't really want people to know that Jonathan is my brother, and I don't want to get a job because of him." "I can understand that. Well, good night, Ashley." "Good night," she said, smiling. She closed the door behind him and went to the bathroom to take a shower. She had just finished and was about to go to bed when she heard the front door opening. She tiptoed quietly to the front hall, thinking the drunk man may have broken in. She was relieved to find that it was Brock. "Nice to see you home at a decent hour," she remarked sarcastically. "I can smell the alcohol in your breath. Have you been drinking again?" Brock patted her on the shoulder. "Go to sleep. I'm fine. I just came back from a big gathering." Ashley lowered her eyes. She knew that getting kicked out of his own company and having to start over after being destroyed by the Davis Group was difficult for him. She thought about how hypocritical and fickle people were. They had treated Brock like a star when things had been going well for him, but had abandoned him as soon as things had gotten rough. Despite everything that had happened, he still had a handful of friends he could socialize with. The problem was his drinking. Brock was careful to hide his feelings from his sister and refused to let her help him. He said goodnight and went straight to the bathroom. He felt better after taking a relaxing shower. He took his phone out of his pants pocket and hesitated for a while before finally making a call. He was surprised when he heard a familiar female voice on the other end of the line. Brock subconsciously tightened his hand around his phone when he heard the call connect. "Hannah?" he said. He didn't hear anything and strained his ears. Then, he heard the sound of a guitar being strummed. He didn't know why, but his pulse started to race, and he felt flushed. After a short intro, a crisp and clear woman's voice began to sing. It was a love song, and the lyrics were melancholic. Brock held his breath as he listened to the singing. He would recognize that voice anywhere. He shook his head in disbelief. This was Hannah's voice. Why is she singing? He wondered. It sounded as if she were performing on a stage, and the faint sounds of a cheering audience could be heard in the background. Then, he heard a man's voice sing. He immediately recognized it as Ezra's voice. Ezra sang in a lower octave than usual, with Hannah's gentle voice. The song they sang was new to Brock, but he envisioned a peaceful and serene scene as he listened to the sad lyrics. Hannah began to sing the next verse. Her voice was filled with emotion that seemed to come from the depths of her heart. Brock sighed heavily. He had never known that Hannah could sing so beautifully. It sounded as if she was playing the guitar as well. He sat down on the carpeted floor and leaned against his bed. He held his phone in silence and closed his eyes, imagining what she looked like on stage with a spotlight lighting up her beautiful face while she strummed the guitar and sang. He had never seen her perform before. He envisioned a group of young and enthusiastic musician friends by her side. He had been in Riverside City for long enough, and it had been inevitable that they would run into one another, and she would know he had been following her. His heart sank when he remembered how she had ignored him when she had seen him the one time. She had walked past him and chatted with her new friends as if he didn't exist. As Brock sat in his room with a drink in his hand, he thought back to all the things that had happened over the last couple of weeks. He had moved into an apartment next door to Hannah's. Each day, he watched her leave her attic apartment. He played with her kitten Cleo, who seemed to like the attention. When Hannah left, the kitten would jump onto his balcony and wait for him. He bought cat treats for the kitten and often spoiled it. Sometimes, he heard Hannah speak to the little animal. "My sweet Cleo, why are you becoming so chubby when I feed you so little?" Cleo would meow softly and rub her face against Hannah's legs like a spoiled child. Brock watched them from his apartment, not even 10 feet away. He watched as Hannah prepared to leave her apartment, and then he also got ready to go. He then followed her to the music shack, and he sat at the same table in a dark corner every time. He expected her to notice him, but she never did. Not until that fateful day when they inevitably bumped into each other in the hallway of their apartment building. Hannah stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. He reached out his hand and grabbed her shoulder. "Hannah," he started to say. Their eyes locked for a brief moment. He immediately saw the fear in her eyes. Her distraught look startled him. "What must I do to make you leave me alone?" she asked. Brock felt as if his heart had been crushed. The pain was so intense that he was unable to answer. The hallway was narrow, and he had blocked it with his body, making it impossible for her to get past him. They stood silently until Brock managed to say, "If I stayed here in Riverside, would you leave?" She nodded without hesitation. He smiled, but it was a fake smile of a broken man. "Okay, I won't stay." That night, he packed his belongings in a small suitcase and left. 10 days had passed since their encounter in the hallway. Brock hadn't called Hannah again and hadn't returned to Riverside City either. Upon his return home, Brock had remained silent when Ashley had asked about his time in Riverside City. He didn't speak about the past and tried not to think about it. Instead, he immersed himself in his work. He found it to be challenging and time-consuming. Before he had been the heir to Obsidian Industries, everyone had revered him, and clients had been loyal. But now, he was nothing. He had offended his father and the Davis Group. It was a bitterness that he had never experienced before in his life. As time passed, he didn't think about Hannah as often. The days were busy, and he returned home late in the evenings. When he got home, he would shower and go straight to bed, exhausted. He wasn't aware of dreaming about her. Perhaps he did, but he was too tired and didn't remember his dreams when he woke up the following day. As time marched on, he finally began to find life fulfilling, but his heart was still numb. Then, one day, he met a new client. The woman had short hair and must have been in her early 40s. Although she didn't bear much resemblance to Hannah, there was something about the woman's demeanor that reminded him of her. One afternoon, he took his new client out for a business lunch, and the woman's husband joined them. The husband and wife ran the company together, but controlled different business ventures. The waiter presented them with the wine list, but the woman's husband gestured for him to take it away. "My wife had an accident when she was pregnant. We lost the baby, and her health hasn't been very good since then. She can't drink alcohol anymore." Hearing this instantly reminded Brock about what had happened with Hannah. She had also been pregnant. At first, she had wanted to terminate the pregnancy, but he had eventually convinced her to keep the baby. Then, one day, she had accidentally fallen down a flight of stairs and had a miscarriage. He had been so angry that he had chased her out of the house. He had wanted to smack himself for his terrible behavior when he found her outside, freezing from the elements. He then remembered the incident between Hannah and Ashley and how Hannah had been detained at the police station. They had locked her in a prison cell. He recalled noticing the awful purple and green bruises on her arms when she was finally released. As the memories flooded Brock's mind, he felt an indescribable feeling burn deep within him. He downed his drink and poured himself a new one. He had become so drunk that he could barely tell if it was day or night. The beautiful voice continued to sing about heartache and a longing for love that had never had a chance to blossom. Brock realized that although they had been married, he had never felt as if Hannah had truly loved him the way he loved her. It was as if she had been yearning for something he had failed to give, and the lyrics reflected her most intimate feelings. He never really knew her. The music began to slow down as the song came to an end. The audience cheered and whistled. Hannah's performance had been well received. As he listened to the noisy crowd in the background, he suddenly heard Hannah's voice closer to the phone. "That's strange. My phone is on an active call." Hannah hadn't intended on staying in Riverside City for very long. She had planned to travel around the country and visit a few cities to write about. After about a month in Riverside City, she felt she had seen enough, and it was time to move on. That evening, she had gone to the music shack to listen to Ezra's band perform for the last time before leaving Riverside. She had wanted to say her goodbyes to him and the band. Their passion for music had helped her deal with the heartache she had felt. Being around them had gradually made her cheerful, and she had found a new lust for life. Ezra grabbed her by the arm as she entered the VIP bar area. "Hannah, I'm so glad to see you. Please, you have to do us a favor." He frowned with a serious expression on his face. She looked at him quizzically. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Ezra nodded. "Our guitar player was injured in a motorbike accident on the way here. It's not too serious, but his hands are badly injured, and there's no way he'll be able to play anymore. He won't even be able to sing backup vocals because of the medication he's been given. I know that you've learned how to play guitar. Will you help us out tonight?" Hannah was surprised. "Yeah, I know how to play the guitar, but I'm not the best." Ezra chuckled. "You play piano well, and your fingers strum the guitar perfectly. I don't think your current level will be a problem, and I know you have a beautiful voice. I heard you hum before. You can perform with me. What do you say?" He stared into her eyes. Hannah shook her head. "I'm sorry, Ezra. I can't do it. I've never performed on a stage before. I'll be so nervous. I'll make a mess of it." "Come on, Hannah. We've already signed up with the bar for tonight, so we have to play." He looked nervous. "Even if you make a mistake, I'll cover it up." Hannah looked away from his pleading eyes. She was about to turn him down again when the rest of the band entered the bar and began to whistle at Ezra. She sighed. "Okay, I'll do it." There was no time to rehearse. She rushed onto the stage behind the rest of the band and sat on a bar stool behind a microphone. Ezra handed her a guitar. Her throat felt tight, and she suddenly felt extremely nervous. Sitting down, she glanced at the table in a dark corner of the bar. When she saw that Brock wasn't there, she immediately relaxed. She closed her eyes and began to strum the guitar, just as she had practiced so many times on the banks of the river that flowed through Riverside City. As she sang, she felt like she was singing about her heartache and longing for true love, and the lyrics seemed to mirror her melancholic state. The song had ended, and the audience had cheered. Hannah had bowed and walked off the stage. It was only then that a sense of nervousness had washed over her. She had pulled her phone out of her pocket and, to her surprise, she had discovered it was in the middle of an active call. She squinted to see the caller's name on the screen. It was Brock. He was saying something, but she couldn't hear what. He then repeated himself, much louder. "Hannah, you sing like an angel." She stared at the screen for a few seconds and then disconnected the call. Afraid he would call again, she quickly switched off her phone and put it back in her pocket. Meanwhile, Ezra and the band members smiled and chatted happily. Ezra turned to Hannah. "That wasn't bad at all. Good job, Hannah. We've got a full set tonight, so let's get back out there." She nodded and shrugged off the terrible feeling that had arisen from Brock's phone call. "Yeah, sure. Let's go." Craig, one of the band members, smiled at her. "You have a great voice. Why don't you join our band?" She blushed. "No, I can't. I'm leaving tomorrow. I've finished my work here and must visit another city." Ezra stared at her for a while. "Are you sure?" She nodded, and Ezra frowned as he looked down at his phone. The atmosphere suddenly became frosty, but they didn't have much time to dwell on it because they had to start with the next part of their set. Hannah took up her position on the stage, ready for the next song. Back in his bedroom, Brock heard a notification from his phone that the battery was low and needed to be charged. He suddenly sat up. A wave of emotions surged through him. He had to see Hannah immediately. He knew that it would take him hours to reach Riverside City. He would only get there after midnight, regardless of how fast he drove. Hannah would be done singing at the bar and would probably already be asleep in her bed by the time he arrived. But he didn't care. All he could think about was his overwhelming desire to see her. He quickly dressed, grabbed his phone and keys, and headed out the door. Ashley had already fallen asleep in the bedroom next door. She had no idea that her brother was racing out in the middle of the night. Brock took the elevator to the underground parking garage and climbed into his car. He entered the directions to Riverside into his car's GPS and sped off. The road was quiet and dark. It seemed as if he was the only car on the highway. Meanwhile, in Riverside City, Hannah had performed 4 songs with Ezra's band on the VIP bar stage. She had gradually eased into the performance, and her fingers effortlessly strummed and plucked the guitar strings. She had become completely immersed in the music. The audience loved her voice, and the bar owner allowed them to perform more songs. By the time they finished their set, Hannah's fingertips were numb, but her mind was crystal clear. She felt a sense of excitement and contentment that she hadn't felt before. It was as though she had entered a new world that took her away from her dull past and allowed her to see a world of passion and beauty. The band bowed as the audience applauded loudly. "Who's the new singer?" asked a voice in the crowd. "She's beautiful. Is she joining the band?" Hannah blushed and smiled. Ezra quickly stepped in before she could say anything. "We're working on it." Once they were backstage, he turned to her. "Seeing as you're leaving tomorrow, come grab a bite to eat with us tonight." "Sure, that sounds great." After some thought, she decided to turn her phone back on. Although Riverside City seemed safe and the band members were all strong guys, she still had to be careful. They left the bar and stopped at a small cafe. Craig was particularly excited. "Ezra, I asked someone to record our gig tonight. He just sent me the video. How about we give it to Hannah as a memento?" His excitement was met with an icy glare from Ezra. It was clear that their band leader wasn't very happy. Hannah smiled and took Craig's phone. She opened the message and began to watch the video. Seeing herself from a different perspective made her realize how much she had changed in the month she had lived in Riverside City. She wasn't the shy girl in the corner anymore. She was no longer the lonely girl from next door who forced herself to play and joke around like the others. She could have a different life in a new city. She was an unfamiliar face in the crowd, but her newfound passion for music surprised her the most. She watched her performance and felt like she had become a new person. "Please send me a copy of this video." Craig smiled and nodded. "Of course, but be honest with me. Why don't you want to stay?" She looked down for a moment before replying. "I can't. I only came here for work. I have to move on to the next city now." Ezra abruptly stood up and went to collect their order. Craig glanced at him before saying to Hannah in a low, "He's not too happy about you leaving." Hannah sighed. "I've enjoyed being here. Maybe I'll come back one day." As she spoke, she suddenly thought of someone, and shivers ran down her body. 100 miles away on a dark highway, Brock's car brakes screeched, and he slammed into a barrier. It was after midnight when Hannah, Ezra, and the others finally returned to their apartments. Cleo recognized the sound of Hannah's keys in the lock and lunged into her arms as she opened the door. Hannah quickly hugged the cat, noting how she weighed less than before. This puzzled her because Cleo had been eating more than usual during the last 10 days. She shrugged and went into the bathroom to run a bath. Suddenly, her phone began to ring. She wondered who would call her so late at night and quickly pulled it out of her pocket. The name on the screen said Brock. She was about to cancel the call when Cleo jumped up and touched the screen with her little paws, inadvertently answering the call. Hannah took a deep breath and was about to hang up when she heard a woman's voice on the other side of the line. "I'm calling to find out if you know the owner of this phone. He's just been involved in a car accident, and we've called for an ambulance." Hannah's heart sank. Luckily for Brock, another motorist had seen him drive into the barrier and had stopped to help. An ambulance arrived and took him to the nearest hospital. The accident had left Brock unconscious, and he only regained consciousness 2 days later. It was morning, and the warm sun shone through the windows. He opened his eyes and saw Ashley in a chair beside his bed. Her eyes were red and swollen. She cried out when she saw he had woken up. "Brock, you're awake! You scared me half to death!" Intense waves of pain washed over Brock, and his head ached. He frowned. What happened? All he could remember was seeing a cat appear in front of him on the highway. It made him think of Cleo, and he had swerved to miss it. He had drunk a lot of wine before he raced off to Riverside City. He must have lost control of the car and had an accident. He didn't remember what had happened afterward. Ashley was both worried and angry. "Why did you go out driving when you knew you were drunk? The doctor said you have a concussion and must stay in the hospital for a few days." She looked up at him and sighed. What was so urgent? Couldn't it have waited until the next day? Luckily, you just hit your head and have a slight abrasion on your hand. It could have been far worse. He looked at Ashley's worried face. She was right, but he couldn't remember why he had rushed off. Noticing his puzzled expression, she grabbed his arm. "Are you okay? Is there something wrong?" He looked at her and stammered. I don't know. Didn't I tell you I was going out?" She shook her head angrily. "How much did you drink?" Brock rubbed his temples. He wasn't the type who would drive drunk. A nurse entered the room. "Mr. Porter, I'm glad to see you're awake. I'll call for the doctor." She then handed him his phone. "We charged your phone for you." Brock leaned forward and grimaced slightly as he took the phone from the nurse. His hand was swollen and hurt, but he was able to hold his phone well enough to see the screen and scroll through its applications. He scanned his messages and didn't find anything peculiar. He then scrolled through his call records. The most recent incoming call was from Ashley. She had woken up and hadn't been able to find him, so she had tried calling him. The nurse answered it and told her what had happened. But it was the contact name, wife, that left him stunned. He stared at his screen for a long time and could feel his pulse begin to race. Eventually, he looked up at his sister and stuttered. "Ashley, am I married?" Ashley looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Yes, you haven't divorced your wife yet." Brock closed his eyes for a while. His head ached. He opened his eyes again and stared at Ashley. "I don't understand. My wife? Did I get married? Why don't I remember?" Ashley was shocked. "You don't remember?" His heart sank. "I'm married? I have a wife?" he thought. A chill ran through Ashley's body. "Have you forgotten?" She leaned over and picked up Brock's medical file on the table. She scanned through it again. He might have amnesia due to his head injury. It really did seem like he couldn't remember Hannah at all. "Tell me the truth," Brock asked slowly. Surprised, she began to explain. "Well, your relationship started accidentally, eventually blossoming into something. But then, because of me, you hurt her." She only told him a few things she knew, but not everything. "You really like her. The problem is that she wants a divorce, and you disagree." Brock rubbed his forehead again. "Are you sure she wants a divorce?" "Yes, and it's all my fault." Ashley turned her gaze toward the window. "If that's the case, I'll give her back her freedom." Ashley gasped. "Brock," she started to say, but he interrupted her. "I don't remember her anymore, so this marriage affects her more than it affects me. I don't know her. I'll wait until I'm discharged so that we can finalize the divorce. It's what she wants, after all." He sighed and closed his eyes again. Feeling slightly annoyed, Ashley realized she shouldn't have said anything. "No, don't be like this. You'll regret it someday." He opened his eyes, but turned away from his sister. "I don't see myself in a meaningless marriage. If we don't have feelings for one another, it's meaningless." As he spoke, he felt an unexpected heartache, but tried to ignore the feeling. Seeing as the marriage is only on paper, divorce is the best option for both of us. He turned back to look at Ashley and saw that a woman had entered the room. She was young and elegant with delicate facial features. When their eyes locked, she stood dead still and stared at him. Ashley turned around and gasped. "Hannah?" Only then did Brock realize who the woman was. She was his wife. He wondered if she had heard his conversation with Ashley. He suddenly felt worried. Hannah finally spoke. "I received a call that you were in an accident the other day, so I came over." What he meant to say? Ashley started to explain, but Hannah cut her off. "It doesn't matter. I just want action." Looking at Brock, she felt no reason to soften her hard feelings for him. She didn't care for him. "It's settled. We'll get a divorce as soon as you've been discharged." He looked into her eyes. "Okay." Ashley looked at her brother, and then at Hannah. She shook her head sadly. The doctor arrived and examined Brock. He concluded that Brock's condition was both physiological and psychological. He determined that while Brock's physical injuries would heal quickly, his psychological health would take much longer to improve. After about 3 days in hospital, Brock was discharged. On the day of his discharge, Hannah arrived at the hospital with 2 marriage certificates in her hands. She was accompanied by her lawyer, Dominic Vaughn. Brock and Hannah went straight from the hospital to the local divorce court. They only had a small portion of assets that they shared, and Hannah was happy to let Brock have them. Her lawyer, Dominic, drew up the divorce agreement and handed it to them to sign. Brock read the terms and conditions, but couldn't shrug off his deep heartache. It was as if signing the agreement would sever all ties to a woman he didn't know, yet he knew all too well. He watched as Hannah signed the agreement without any hesitation. Her handwriting was as beautiful as her. Although they sat close, he felt the vast chasm between them. He sighed and slowly signed the agreement. Dominic took the signed copies and hurried to a small office to lodge the divorce. A short while later, he returned with 2 new certificates. He handed one to Brock and the other to Hannah. Brock read the information on the certificate and suddenly felt like he had been hit over the head. He put his hands against his forehead and let out a long sigh. Hannah didn't notice Brock's reaction. Instead, she looked at the certificate in her hands, and her eyes were immediately drawn to the words, "Divorce Certificate," printed in bold at the top of the page. The tangled emotions buried deep in her heart finally began to surface. It was because of him that she had relapsed into another deep depression. She had pulled herself together enough to escape to a new city and start her life over. But even after hurting her, he continued to interfere in her life. It had terrified her when she had bumped into him in the hallway of her apartment building. His presence had confused her, and for a moment, hoping she would never have to see him again. And he had listened to her. She hadn't seen him for several days after that, and those days had been bliss. She had felt calm and had enjoyed her solitude. She had found joy in spending time with new friends. Sitting beside him at the divorce court made her feel a happiness she hadn't felt for a long time. The divorce certificate meant that there wasn't a connection between them anymore. Although she felt an emptiness, she also felt as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She never had to face him again. She didn't have to think about the past, their marriage, the loss of their baby, and the way he had hurt her. She didn't have to open those wounds ever again. She could bury her past and look toward her future. She knew she needed time to grow independent and strong. She needed time to heal before she would have enough courage to face the pain of the past. The separation felt good, and she was ready for her new life. She was free, and nothing held her back anymore. Hannah stood up to leave. Brock had recovered from his aching head, but was still weak and continued to sit for a short while longer before finally standing up. A few scenes flashed through his mind as if memories were trying to break through, but they were too fast for him to grasp. He shook his head. The divorce court was busy that day, and many people milled about. Hannah and Dominic were still waiting for the elevator by the time Brock had gotten up. He slowly made his way over to them. They stood in silence as the elevator doors opened. Once inside the elevator, Brock looked at Hannah's reflection in the mirrored walls. and he felt an overwhelming urge to hug her. When the elevator reached the ground floor, he watched her walk out. It was as if she was about to leave his world and never look back. He quickly followed her out. "Hannah, wait." She turned her head and looked back at him. She had nothing more to say to him. They were divorced. He walked up to her, stretched his arms, and hugged her tightly. Her body stiffened, and she began to struggle. He quickly let her go and saw the resistance in her eyes. "Take care, Hannah." She looked into his eyes and felt her throat dry up. "Yes, you too, Brock." He nodded and watched her and her lawyer turn toward the street. He wasn't in a hurry to get into his car. Instead, he decided to phone his sister. "Ashley, it's done. We're divorced." He couldn't focus on what Ashley was saying because he noticed something tugging at his pants. He looked down and saw a small cat. Out of habit, he reached into his pocket for some cat treats, but they were empty. The cat meowed and scratched at his pants again. Realizing there would be no treats, the cat sat at his feet and stared at him with a reproachable gaze. The two of them just stood there, staring at one another. Suddenly, a familiar voice called, "Cleo, come here, you rascal!" It was Hannah. The cat gave him one last look and leaped into Hannah's arms. "You scared me! Don't go running off like that!" She held the cat tightly against her chest. It meowed softly as she carried it away. Brock shook his head and looked down at the fur on his pants. His memory was still foggy, but he assumed that they had raised a cat together. He exhaled slowly, turned his back to the divorce court, and headed straight to work. Being hospitalized had caused a setback with some of the contracts he had been busy with, and he had to renegotiate them. This left him with little time to dwell on the emptiness that suddenly filled his entire being. Nancy was preparing for her graduation. In just a few hours, her life as a university student would end. She had completed her thesis a few days before and now returned to campus to attend the graduation ceremony. She and Jonathan had recently gone to pick up the results of the genetic tests. Although she had already guessed the results, she was still shocked to discover that Maria and Harold Sloane's genes were a 99% match. He was her father. However, she and Jonathan decided it wasn't the right time to acknowledge that she and Harold were related. Although Maria had the blood of the Sloane family flowing through her body, Harold wasn't married, making her an illegitimate daughter and nothing more. Nancy wondered what it meant to have an illegitimate child in a place like Havana. But she decided to make the graduation day about her and her achievements. She would publicly acknowledge her newly discovered relationship with Harold and the Sloane family after her graduation. Nancy didn't care about the Sloane family and their vast fortune. She only wanted to tell Harold that he had a daughter. She wanted to tell him that his daughter was beautiful and sensible, and maybe, one day, they could form a bond that only a father and daughter shared. She didn't know why she felt that way. Even though she was Nancy, just in Maria's physical form, she still felt a connection to Harold. She thought that perhaps her own father's love, which had long since gone, could be replaced by Harold's. Nancy arrived at the university early that morning. She looked at the date and realized it was the same date as her rebirth, marking a year since her whole. It was also the anniversary of Maria's death. She felt emotional as she went to her old dormitory. She wanted to collect a few things that she and Maria had left behind. A few books that had belonged to Steve Davis lay about, but most of the other belongings had already been cleared out. She had just finished packing when she heard someone standing outside the open door. It was Susan. They had once participated in a robotics competition together. Susan's eyes lit up when she saw Nancy, but she was slightly hesitant to approach her. Nancy noticed her hesitation, smiled, and gestured for her to come in. "Hi, Susan. It's so nice to see you." "Hey, Maria. I'm glad to see you. I didn't think you'd be coming to the graduation ceremony today," she said as she sat on a chair. "But of course I'd come. I'm also a graduate. She smiled at Susan. In her heart, she was also there for Maria. Susan giggled. I'm so excited. She looked at Nancy pensively. I still can't believe that you're married to Jonathan Davis, and that I know you. I wanted to ask you something. When we did that competition together, and Mr. Davis handed the award to you, did you two already know each other? Nancy thought back to the competition and felt slightly dizzy. She hadn't had much intention of being involved with Jonathan back then. But he had always been strong and decisive and hadn't given her any room to escape his advances. Gradually, he had won her over. She nodded. Yeah, we were already together then. Susan's eyes went wide, and she covered her mouth in shock. She exhaled slowly. I think I understand now. You pretended that something was going on between you and Steve, while you were studying so that your relationship with Jonathan wouldn't cause problems. But you were secretly dating Jonathan. It was all a ruse. Nancy blushed. Yeah, I guess that's how it went. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but Susan had hit the nail on the head. Let's go to the auditorium and find our seats. Yeah. Susan stood up, but stopped at the doorway. Okay, I just have to ask, what is your family like? Is it like those famous families we see on TV? You know, where everyone sits in a fancy dining room in formal evening gowns while servants stand to attention? Where the table is so big that you can hardly see each other? Nancy laughed. Susan had been watching too many TV dramas. It was almost 9 o'clock in the morning, and the auditorium had started filling up with the lecturers, students, and guests. Nancy had been selected to deliver the valedictorian speech. She quickly found her seat. As she sat down, several students eagerly greeted her. She smiled happily at them. Then she saw her friend Emma enter the auditorium. She waved at Emma to sit next to her. Emma grinned. Hey, Maria, have you practiced your speech? No, not really. I'm just going to improvise as I go along. Emma shook her head and gave her a thumbs up. Soon, it was time for the graduation ceremony to begin. The ceremony celebrated the students' achievements and their exciting futures. The university was one of the most prestigious universities in the country, and many influential people from all areas of business had been invited to attend the event. Nancy glanced over at Jonathan, who sat in the VIP guest area. She chuckled to herself. He's so sneaky. He told me he had an important business meeting outside of the city today, she thought. It seemed as if he sensed her gaze and looked straight at her. Their eyes locked, and he smiled warmly at her. Look, Maria, Emma exclaimed, poking her elbow into Maria's side. Your husband is here. He's sitting with the VIPs. Susan heard Emma and looked around. Yeah, I see him too. Oh, and he's definitely smiling at you, Maria. How sweet, she sighed. And to think that all this time, everyone thought he was a cold and heartless businessman. Sure doesn't seem like that now. I bet he's only like that with his business dealings, Emma replied. Susan giggled. I'm so jealous. I wish I had a handsome husband like that. I haven't even found anyone decent enough to date, let alone marry. Nancy blushed slightly and whispered to Susan, You'll find your true love one day. The excited students chatted and whispered until the dean tapped on the microphone, indicating it was time for the speeches to begin. He began by summarizing the past 4 years and commending the students on their achievements. Then, he introduced the first speaker. Honored guests, today, we are fortunate enough to hear a few words of encouragement from the esteemed CEO of the Davis Group, Mr. Jonathan Davis. Jonathan walked up to the stage and took his place behind the podium. He oozed authority and power. Nancy watched him and felt her heart beat slightly faster. They had known each other for over a year already, and although she saw his handsome face every day, she still felt like a young schoolgirl gawking at her first love. She began to breathe faster and felt flushed and giddy as she thought about how everything that had happened over the past year. He looked handsome in his designer suit and exuded a powerful aura that filled the entire auditorium. Jonathan leaned toward the microphone and began his speech. It is an honor to celebrate the graduation of this university's talented and hard-working students. Today is one of the most memorable moments of your life. This is where your life as a successful adult begins. Suddenly, Nancy understood why he was there. It was also a memorable moment in her life. She had already graduated as Nancy, but they hadn't been together then, so he hadn't attended her graduation ceremony. But now that they were together, he had promised to be part of all the important moments in her life. Jonathan continued with his speech. I have an exciting announcement. The Davis Group has established a special fund as an incentive for university students who dream of becoming entrepreneurs one day. The audience burst into applause and cheered loudly at the news. Jonathan smiled. We want to encourage everyone to start their own businesses, and we hope that the talent nurtured by the incentive will eventually join the Davis Group. He paused for a moment and then turned to look directly at Nancy. And my wife's company, Bright Star. Everyone turned to focus on Nancy. She has incredible management skills, and her projects show great potential. The future of Bright Star is hard to predict, but it is on the path to greatness. He smiled at her proudly. Nancy's cheeks were red, and her heart overflowed with love and happiness as she listened to her husband praising her in front of thousands of students, professors, and families. After Jonathan finished speaking, he smiled at her and left the podium. The auditorium burst into a thunderous applause. He returned to his seat and sat down next to his family. Katie was there too. She had begged him to let her skip classes that day, and he had finally agreed. She had listened to Jonathan's speech intently, and her eyes were full of admiration and awe. He burst into laughter as he sat down. Katie, you're positively glowing. She nodded enthusiastically. I am. I want to be just like Aunt Maria. You'll need to study and work very hard, he said solemnly. It'll take a lot of dedication and determination. I know, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. The finance graduates were already lining up on stage. Others followed, and soon it was Nancy and Emma's turn. Katie's heart skipped a beat when she saw Emma, whose graduation gown looked stunning on her tall, slender figure. She stood behind Nancy as they queued up on stage. One by one, the graduates received their diplomas and walked off stage. Once the ceremony had ended, the dean invited Nancy to come up to the podium to give her speech. It wasn't her first. Years ago, when she had still been Nancy, she had been the valedictorian of her class at Houston University. Her parents had also donated a sports field to the university, courtesy of the Franklin Group. A million thoughts raced through her mind. She stopped in front of the microphone and peered out at the sea of eyes staring back at her. I'm honored to be here with you today, she began. When I embarked on my studies at New York University, as a science major specializing in artificial intelligence, everything was so new and overwhelming that I felt lost. She looked out into the crowd and found Jonathan nodding and smiling at her encouragingly. He was captivated by her voice and felt a surge of love he had never felt before. He had known the woman on stage for barely a year, and now she was his wife. He couldn't have been prouder. Nancy cleared her throat. Though she hadn't prepared a speech for that day, she knew exactly what she wanted to say. The other graduates held their breaths as they waited for her to continue. She had become a legend in their eyes. Nancy talked about her experiences at the university, the valuable friendships she had made, and the knowledge she had acquired. She finished by saying, Never abandon your principles and stay true to your heart. Be strong and ambitious during these most important years of your life, and never live to regret a single day. The audience clapped and cheered, Jonathan jumped up and presented her with a bouquet on the stage. He hugged her hard. "Congratulations on your graduation." She smiled as tears rolled down her cheeks. They left the auditorium soon after with Katie. Jonathan noticed the look of disappointment on her face. "Katie, what's wrong? Should I ask the driver to take you back to school?" She shrugged, upset she hadn't had a chance to speak to Emma. They walked out of the building and saw that their car was already waiting for them. "Go on," Jonathan urged Katie. "Maria and I can take a cab." She said goodbye to them and was about to get in when she saw Emma on the sidewalk. She called out her name and ran up to her. "Emma, I'm so glad I caught you." Emma looked at her in surprise. "Hi, Katie. I didn't expect to see you here today." "I came with Uncle Jonathan to see Maria," Katie lied. She bit her lips and looked at the ground in embarrassment. "You skipped class?" Emma asked. Katie shrugged. "It was an important day. I can always make it up." A few of Emma's fellow graduates came up and asked her to take selfies with them. They smiled at Katie. "Is this your little sister?" one of the boys asked. "Kind of," Emma replied. "Is she in junior high?" a girl queried. Katie turned red with embarrassment. "I wish I were that young again," the boy said, laughing. "Emma, I didn't know you had a sister." Emma just smiled and said nothing. "I heard a group of girls talking about you in the auditorium," one of Emma's friends said. "They were looking at your social media profile. One of them was pretty cute." Emma shrugged. "So what? They can stare at my photos all they want." "Don't be such a snob," the boy said, putting his arm around her shoulder. "Have you met anyone at the Davis group? What sort of girls are you into? I bet you have high standards." Katie clenched her fists. She glanced at Emma, waiting for her response. Emma looked thoughtful. "I'd like to meet someone good-looking, mature, and ambitious without being too clingy." She thought about Maria as she said this, even though she knew her friend was straight and married. "You see, I knew your standards were high," the boy said teasingly. Emma shrugged. "Come on, let's take some selfies." She suddenly remembered that Katie was still standing there and patted her on the shoulder. "You should go back to school now. You still have your afternoon classes." She nodded reluctantly and pouted. "Okay, see you later." She walked back to the car slowly and turned around to watch Emma take pictures with her friends. Suddenly, she called out her name. Emma turned around, surprised. "What is it?" "Just be patient and wait for me," Katie replied. She desperately wanted Emma to stay single until she grew up and could go out with her. She was determined to mature as fast as she could and become the most beautiful, ambitious, strong partner Emma wanted. But Emma didn't understand what she meant and looked at her with a confused expression. "Never mind," Katie said, smiling. She waved at her and got into the car. Nancy returned to the dormitory and took the last item she had left behind. She and Jonathan then walked around campus, hand in hand. They stopped by the lakeside, and Nancy suddenly remembered how he had forced her to run around the lake. She laughed out loud. Jonathan grinned, also recalling the incident. "Should we do a few laps for old time's sake?" She shrugged. "Why not? Just go slowly." They ran around the lake, holding hands and photobombing graduates and their families who were taking pictures. A while later, Jonathan's phone rang. It was Xavier, calling to discuss some business matters with him. "By the way, happy birthday, man," Jonathan said at the end of their conversation. "Are you up for a get-together?" "Of course," Xavier replied, "but it may have to wait until the weekend. Esther and I are very busy." After he hung up, Xavier looked at the calendar. He couldn't believe he had just turned 30. Esther was always leaving early and coming home late ever since she had returned to the States. Her apartment had burned down, so she was staying with him. It was a temporary solution, she had told him. That morning, she had asked him what his plans were for that evening, pretending to have forgotten about his birthday. He had been aloof and had merely said he would try and get home early that evening. She had gone to the bakery in the afternoon and returned to his apartment to decorate it. She couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he came home. Rush hour traffic was terrible that evening, and it was almost 7 o'clock when Xavier entered the underground parking lot of his building. His cell phone rang as he was parking his car. It was Esther. "Darling, I'm so sorry. I thought I'd be free for the rest of the day, but there was an emergency at the office. I won't be back till late. Don't wait up for me." Xavier was stunned. He looked at the big bouquet of flowers on the seat next to him and sighed. "Okay, I understand. Don't stress too much. Call me when you're finished. I can come pick you up." Esther tried to stifle a laugh. Her plan was working. "I'm really sorry. There's some food in the fridge. Make yourself something for dinner." Xavier locked his car and walked across the dimly lit parking garage. "Don't worry about me. You should eat too. Do you want me to order takeout for you and have it delivered to your office?" "No, there's no need," she replied. "I'll just grab a bite with my colleagues." Xavier got into the elevator, disappointed. He couldn't believe he would be spending the evening all alone in his apartment and regretted not telling Esther that it was his birthday. He had even booked a table at a posh restaurant and was planning to take her to a show after dinner. He also had another big surprise in store for her. It was dark inside the apartment when he entered. A sudden wave of loneliness washed over him. Coming home had never felt so terrible. "Happy birthday to me," he thought bitterly as he reached out to switch on the light. He flipped the switch, but nothing happened. Confused, he laid the bouquet on the hall table and took out his phone to use as a flashlight. Suddenly, he heard a noise and saw a heart-shaped pattern appear on the floor. A shadowy figure emerged from the kitchen and came into the living room, holding a big cake with lit candles on it. "Happy birthday to you," Esther sang in her sweet, high-pitched voice. There were 30 candles on the cake. The flames lit up her beaming face, and she was so beautiful that his heart skipped a beat. He blinked several times and just stood there, stunned. He had never felt so much love for Esther as he did at that moment. She stopped in front of him. "Happy 30th, my dear." He took the cake, placed it gently on the coffee table, and pulled her into his arms. He held her so tight that Esther thought she would suffocate. She laughed softly. "Are you trying to kill me?" He loosened his grip and stared into her eyes. "Are you surprised?" she asked. He swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "Very. I was so depressed when you called to tell me I would be coming home to an empty apartment tonight. I thought you had forgotten that it was my birthday today." Esther kissed him tenderly. "Quick, make a wish and blow out the candles before they go out." Xavier switched on the lamp in the living room and leaned over the cake, hesitating. "Actually, I have one very important wish." He straightened himself and looked deep into her eyes. She was taken aback by his sudden seriousness. "What is it?" Xavier got down on one knee and took out a black velvet box out of his jacket pocket. Esther's eyes widened in disbelief as he opened the box to reveal an exquisite diamond ring that dazzled in the soft light. She gasped and covered her mouth. She couldn't believe he was proposing. A million thoughts raced through her mind. They had only recently been reunited and hadn't spent much time together. Still, they were crazy about each other, and it made perfect sense to get married. So why wait? "I booked a table at a restaurant tonight and was planning to propose there, but this just seemed like the perfect moment," Xavier explained to Esther. "You have no idea how much this means to me, and I can't wait a single minute longer for you to say yes." This is an even bigger surprise for me, Esther murmured. We haven't been together for long, but we've known each other for quite some time, and I had always felt something for you. We've gone through so much in so short a time, and I can't tell you how happy I am that we're together. She nodded, choking back tears. When I saw you admiring Maria's wedding ring and stopping by the bridal shop to gaze at the wedding dresses, I thought, why wait? He continued. I know we still haven't settled everything with our families, but that shouldn't stop us from getting married. So how about it, Esther Williams? Will you be my wife? I promise to love you forever. Esther's head was still reeling. It was the last thing she had expected to happen that evening. He's right, she thought. What difference does it make how long we've been together? We love each other, and that's all that matters. Why wait? We have to go after the things we want in life and stop worrying about the future. Xavier, who was still kneeling in front of her, suddenly turned to the cake and closed his eyes. My 30th birthday wish is to marry Esther, he said softly before blowing out the candles. Yes, Xavier, I'll marry you, she said, smiling. He breathed a sigh of relief, took the diamond ring from his velvet box, and slipped it on her finger. She stretched out her hand, admiring the ring, and then pulled him up to kiss him passionately. They were locked in an embrace for so long that Esther's lips began to burn. He pulled away gently and kissed her on the forehead and cheeks. She loved that he was so tender and patient and kind. She hugged him again and then pointed to the cake. Why don't you taste it? I baked it myself. Really? He asked with surprise. You made this yourself? She nodded. I took the afternoon off and asked the baker to help me make it at the cake shop. Xavier kissed her again. He wanted nothing more than to take her into the bedroom just then, but he knew she wanted him to taste the cake. Esther switched on the other lights in the living room while Xavier cut the cake. She glanced at her hand from time to time, admiring the diamond ring. In the bright light, she noticed that it had a unique shape and was pleased that Xavier had picked out something so gorgeous. When did you get it? She asked. He looked up. I ordered it the day after we came back from Cuba. I had it made especially for you. How romantic. I wasn't expecting something like this. He finished cutting the cake and put a piece on a plate for her. She was about to taste it when a thought suddenly occurred to her. She put her fork down. What's wrong, honey? He asked. I hope you're not worried about the calories. She shook her head. It's not that. I just remembered what happened 3 years ago on your birthday. He looked at her with a puzzled expression. 3 years ago? I recall that we had parted ways then. Do you remember how angry I was? I was stir-crazy about you, but you ignored me. I even baked a cake and went over to your office to surprise you, but you were with some other woman, talking and laughing. He frowned. I don't remember that. Besides, you were the one who ended it. I was so upset. I saw you with my own eyes, she argued. I remember it like it was yesterday, and it was the main entrance of your office building. You were coming out with a blonde-haired woman, and when you saw me, you both laughed in my face. It must have been my old classmate, he said. She got married and became pregnant not long ago. Esther nodded. Isn't she the one you lived with abroad for a while? Come on, don't deny it. Xavier was stunned. He had forgotten about the woman and suddenly realized that he was face to face with Esther's wild imagination and jealous streak. He had never seen that side of her. Esther, there was nothing between us, Xavier quickly explained. She happened to be on a business trip and called me up on my birthday. We met in my office after work and went for a drink. I swear, don't remember you showing up with a cake. We were probably laughing about something that had happened at school when you saw us." "You looked pretty happy to me," Esther remarked. "I was never into her. I even rejected her invitation to dinner the next day. We knew each other in university, but I've hardly ever seen her since we graduated. She now lives on the other side of the country. I think I saw her once at the airport in Chicago after that day." Esther laughed to spite herself. "Okay, I won't argue with you on your birthday. It's just that you made me feel like I was nothing to you." Xavier shook his head, not knowing what else to say to convince her. "I threw the coup," she continued. "Then I went home, moped around for a bit, and sent you a message saying that you won't have to worry about me chasing you ever again." Xavier's jaw dropped. "You mean if that woman hadn't shown up at my office that day and led you to mistakenly believe that we were an item, you and I would have gotten together 3 years ago?" Esther was stunned when she thought about it. "You know, a friend of mine told me you would eventually realize you were too good for me and give up," Xavier continued. "I was so insecure. I thought I'd give it 3 months, and if you still had the hots for me after that, I'd ask you out. I even had the 90 days marked on my calendar." She looked at him with disbelief. He took a bite of the cake. The cream melted his mouth. "This is the best cake I've ever had," he said, getting up and embracing her. "I'm sorry that we lost 3 years of this because of a stupid misunderstanding." She sighed and looked up at him. "Were you really planning to ask me out that day?" He nodded and cleared his throat. "I went home later that evening and wanted to call you, but then I got your message. I was sure you had gotten over me. Just promise me that you'll tell me if something's on your mind from now on, okay? I can't bear for something like this to happen again." Esther fought back tears. "Okay, I promise. No more secrets and misunderstandings. I hope we don't ever have to talk about that day again." "Oh, I almost forgot your birthday gift," she said suddenly. She ran to the bedroom and returned a minute later with a paper bag. He peered inside and saw a small, elegant box with dried flowers taped to it and a logo. "It's a unique cologne that I had mixed especially for you. No one else has this scent. It's based on your personality." He smiled. "Thank you so much. I love it. But what's my personality?" "Flirtatious, secretive, sometimes dazed and confused," she told him teasingly. "Cold and reserved on the outside, but wild and passionate on the inside." He laughed. "Is that true?" She nodded. "Absolutely. If you wear this scent, I'll be able to pick you out in a room full of thousands of men with my eyes closed. I think you'll—" Xavier cut her off with a kiss, and they fell onto the couch. "How about I show you my really wild side now?" She giggled. "Hey, I haven't eaten my cake yet." "Okay," he said, kissing her on the forehead. He grabbed the plate and fed her a forkful of cake. "You're right. This cake is delicious, if I do say so myself." That weekend, Xavier and Esther went to a gathering with their friends. Nancy gasped when she saw the diamond ring on Esther's finger. "Oh my goodness, did he propose?" Esther nodded happily. "Tell me everything," Nancy whispered, grabbing her arm and pulling her aside. Jonathan and Xavier were in the garden drinking when Jonathan's cell phone vibrated. He read the email informing him that his medication had received FDA approval and was officially up for auction. At the bottom was an invitation to attend the auction that day. He was about to put his phone away when he received another email that puzzled him. It was from a stranger, claiming to be the exclusive club that Jonathan was a member of. He claimed that the asthma medication now belonged to the club because Jonathan had exchanged it for membership, and that they had sold the rights to the medication to another member at a very high price. This member wanted to meet with him. Jonathan frowned. Why would anyone buy the exclusive rights to a medication for asthma? He wondered. Can't even cure asthma, only alleviate the symptoms. He hesitated before responding to the email, saying that he was willing to meet the person in private. A minute later, he received a reply that the club would arrange for the two of them to meet at the auction that day. He shrugged and got himself another drink. His phone rang.
Sir, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a problem with the first batch of cars,
Jack said. Jonathan's heart sank. What is it?
Apparently, there's an issue with the brake system. I found nothing amiss originally when you asked me to investigate, but I just discovered that the brake manufacturing company we bought earlier was secretly operated by your cousin Alexander.
Jonathan groaned. Are you absolutely sure?
Positive, sir.
Jack told him.
It's just been confirmed.
Jonathan couldn't believe what he was hearing. The Davis Group had been working on their new cars for 2 years. They had followed strict guidelines, from research and development to manufacturing and supply, before finally making their decision to go public. They had the most advanced production line, and it had taken very long to manufacture the high-end cars they had offered at a very high price. They had already produced more than 20,000 pieces, and 90% of them had been sold. The remaining 10% also had potential buyers. Jonathan considered the predicament they were in. If there were a problem with the brake system, as Jack claimed, they would need to recall the cars and inspect them. They simply couldn't risk ruining the company's reputation. They had learned their lesson earlier and become extra rigorous with R&D and manufacturing, investing huge amounts of money to make sure their products were flawless. Jonathan knew that even the smallest error could damage the company and lead to significant losses. He hung up the phone and apologized to Xavier. I'm sorry, but it looks like there's an emergency at the office. I have to go. Nancy was chatting with Esther when she saw the concerned look on his face. She followed him inside to the kitchen. Jonathan, what's wrong? There's an issue with the first batch of cars, he replied, patting her shoulder. I have to go to the office. Don't worry, I'll handle it. She nodded. Okay, but call me if you need anything. Jonathan got into his car and checked his phone. There were several trending topics on social media, and he was dismayed to discover that the news about the cars had already leaked and become the number 3 topic under the hashtag Davis Group Cars Are Duds. He refreshed the page, and within seconds, the topic had climbed to first place. Jonathan pounded his fist on the steering wheel. He was sure that it was Alexander's doing. When on earth did he start planning this? He wondered, fuming. He could only guess that it had been around the time the Davis Group had acquired the car brake manufacturing company a year and a half ago. The R&D for the car's core power source had been developed internally, but they had decided to purchase one of the top companies globally for the brake system. Jonathan concluded that their mistake was to have trusted the company's credentials and R&D and not hired experts to investigate their technology. Xavier must have gotten in on the deal and set up a trap, he thought. At that time, I didn't even know that the Davisons had such powerful business ties with Cuba. He wouldn't put anything past his cousin. After all, he and his brothers had tried to kill him multiple times. Jonathan drove to the production facility where several reporters were already waiting. Alexander must have given them a heads up, he thought grimly. They found out before I did.